thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to 100 Not Out, featuring your hosts Dr. Damien Christoph and Marcus Pearce.
Hello and welcome to 100 Not Out, a weekly show dedicated to helping you master the art of aging well. My name is Marcus Pearce and here I am with the legend himself, the co-founder of The Wellness Couch and The Wellness Guys, Dr. Damien Christoph. Hello, legend.
Hello, Marcus.
Now, Damo, you had the great fortune recently of sharing the stage over in San Francisco with one of humanity's greatest people.
Absolutely.
I speak of a man by the name of Mitch Albom. We've both read his books, not all of them, but some of the best books you will ever read. Mitch Albom, for those of you that don't know, is an internationally acclaimed author. He's a journalist. He loves his sport, which means I love Mitch just like
so
that.
Much.
Absolutely.
That's right.
He's a musician as well, which we'll talk to him about as well. And Mitch has been good enough to join us from his home in the States. It's a very warm 100 Not Out welcome to you. Thanks for joining us, Mitch.
Thanks for having me on your program.
Mitch, we had the great pleasure of sharing the stage at the Wave in San Francisco only a few weeks ago. And when you got up to speak, I don't know if everybody knew the gravity of your message and to what extent you'd be able to move the crowd, but there was absolute silence in the crowd as you recounted the story of Tuesdays with Morrie. Now, the amazing thing about that particular presentation was that it seemed to come so much from the heart and so much of what you'd learnt, and you appeared to have been moved so much by your lecturer from university that you then shared the closing few months with him of his life, and what was profound about that was that it seemed like it was only days ago that this actually had occurred. But when I read the book myself, I realized that it happened some 20 years ago, and I kept on thinking, has the story of Tuesdays with Morrie and the story of Morrie Swartz, has that been something that stayed with you and affected you for the whole of your life since then?
Yes, it has on a lot of different levels. I mean, I think if I had never written a book about the experience, it still would have stayed with me all the time because it was very profound for me personally. But having written a book about the experience, then everybody else in the world who read it constantly reminds me of the experience. And so there's probably not a day in my life, unless I stay in the house, that someone doesn't come up and say, oh, I read Tuesdays with Morrie, or I like that part in Tuesdays with Morrie, or what was that like at Tuesdays with Morrie, or I don't get asked to speak as you attended at different groups and talk to them. So in its own way, it's sort of like, I always say, it's like the graduate class that you never get out of. You just keep going back over and over and over again. And so I'm like a permanent teaching assistant to my old professor. And you're right, it's 20 years next year for the book, 20 years, more than 20 since it actually happened. And I don't think I'll ever forget it. I mean, it's permanently embedded in my mind.
Well, Mitch, I mean, the thing is, when you look at the numbers, we're talking 35 million books sold. You've written, this is The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto. Can you bring this up so people can have a look? This is book number 7. I've read Tuesdays with Morrie. I've read The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. Now, remind me, I'm sure I've watched, there's a movie as well. Do I remember correctly? Is it Cuba Gooding Jr.? Is it Cuba Gooding Jr. or someone that's in The 5 People You Meet in Heaven?
No, there have been 4 movies so far made of the books that I've written. Tuesdays with Morrie was the first, and that had Jack Lemmon played Morrie, and Hank Azaria played me. In The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, John Voight played Eddie, and there was a whole long cast: Ellen Burstyn, Jeff Daniels, Michael Imperioli.
Oh, that's right.
Minisic, lots of other people. It was a big, epic kind of.
And he's in the play, and he's in the what we would call Luna Park. What do we call, like a big
theme park?
Big theme park. Big theme park.
Yes, an amusement park. Right.
Yeah.
Amusement park. Yeah.
So you have a constant, when Damien was asking you about the impact it's had on your life, my view is with so many, 35 million books is larger than the population of Australia and then some.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
Just to get a bit of gravity towards the level, like you said, your Morrie's constant teaching assistant for the rest of your life. I gather that it's something that you can never escape. I'm curious, just because you're a human being, I'm sure you value privacy as well. I mean, do you find it hard to always be the guy that has had the profound impact on people's lives when you're having a tough day or things are just hard? Do these people build you up, or do you sometimes find the mountain of love almost overbearing or overwhelming?
Well, I mean, it's a fair question. I think maybe better suited to someone whose notoriety came from being good looking or being in a movie, playing a superhero. Then I think people like that probably have a right to say, it gets a little old when everybody says, make the Iron Man face or make the Superman pose. Yeah. But when people come up to me, they're usually telling me some very profound story in their life. They say, as you mentioned before, I was a sports writer prior to doing this. I still am. I mean, it's part of my life. But I mean, I was a full-time sports writer and sports journalist and broadcaster before Tuesdays with Morrie. And I always say that before I wrote that book, people used to stop me all the time because I'm on television here in the States. And so, your face is recognizable. And they would stop me and they would say, who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl? And those kind of questions, I would always just sort of keep walking as I answered. I'd say, oh, the Patriots, bye-bye, or somebody else, bye-bye. But after Tuesdays with Morrie, the questions became more like, hey, my grandmother just died and she reminded me of Morrie, or my wife died and the last thing we did together was read Tuesdays with Morrie, and can you share something with me? And you, in cases like that, you can't just stop and say, Patriots, bye-bye. You have to stop. You have to have a conversation. And so the kinds of things that I get stopped for, as opposed to sort of being annoying, like you're saying, or like, geez, leave me alone, I don't want to make the pose. It's actually invigorating and very, it takes you out of whatever problems you might have at that moment, because people are seeking comfort or seeking guidance or asking you something that maybe you remember Morrie said that's going to help them. So I don't find it a bother at all. I find it an honor, really. I don't mean that to sound a cliche. Like I say, I'm not being stopped because of a movie role. I'm being stopped because people think I have something in my life or that I've experienced that might help them. And that's a very important position to be in, and I take it very seriously. So it's never in 20 years been a problem, a burden, or an annoyance in any way.
It's beautiful.
It's so nice, isn't it? It's beautiful. Hey, Mitch, there were so many great, amazing takeaway pieces of Tuesdays with Morrie. And at the very end of the audiobook, we're blessed to be able to listen to you and Morrie talk. And so and to listen to the things that you describe, the shortness of his breath, the type of, the impersonation of the voice that you do throughout the book is so close to the way in which Morrie speaks. You kind of go, wow, that's amazing. But there was a few things that I really took away from that book. In particular, what we value around our life. What does a dying man think about when he's about to leave the planet? What are the most important things, and so on and so forth. Given that you've obviously written the book, you've then obviously read the book because you read it to all of us. What are the things in particular that stood out from your last 13 weeks with Morrie that you still today use as, I suppose, an instruction manual for life for you today?
Well, it's not an exaggeration to say, there were 16 Tuesdays, and there are easily 16 major lessons that I learned from that I employ in my life today, every day. I mean, it's a little bit like saying, what's the smartest piece of advice you ever got in your life? You might be able to come up with one sentence, but then that sentence doesn't apply to every single element of your life. And you say, well, wait, the smartest thing I heard having to do with love was this. The smartest thing I heard having to do with money was this. The smartest thing I heard having to do with, death was this. And the reason that I sort of broke the book down into the way that I did is because that was the way that we actually visited. It wasn't supposed to be a book. I mean, sometimes people get a little confused about the history of Tuesdays with Morrie. I didn't go to visit Morrie, who was dying from what you call motor neuron disease down there, what we call Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS. I went for myself. You know, I didn't go to write a book. I went because I was one of these guys that was going 1,000 miles an hour with no conscience about it. I worked like 6 jobs simultaneously, worked 100 hours a week, and my only sort of motivation was do more, do more, do more, go faster, be more ambitious, accomplish more, without any, it was like a 2-dimensional existence. And so when Morrie sort of reminded me of who I had been when I was in college, which I think was a much better person and a little, you know, slower and kinder and more open to the wonder of the world, it sort of stopped me in my tracks. And it was somebody, you know, it was like encountering somebody from your childhood saying, "Who are you? I don't know you anymore. You know, you're not the kid I grew up with."
Yeah.
And when he did that, I went back because I felt guilty about myself, you know, and sort of who I had become. And I started to visit him on Tuesdays in an inquisitive sort of way. And because he was always a professor, you know, everything with him was always about learning and a particular lesson or teaching. And so we began to break down life by subject. And so one week we would just sort of talk about money, like I said, you know, and how important that really figures in. One week we would talk about the culture that you live in and what if everybody's doing a certain thing or everybody's living a certain way, can you really break away from that and live a different way? One week we would talk about forgiving people, the things that they did, or forgiving yourself. And it was always seen through the eyes of a guy who was dying and him saying, look, when you get to the end, this is what matters. When you're at the beginning, you may think, no, it's a totally different value system. But when you get to the end, and we're all going to get to the end, you're going to find out that this is what matters. And I you know, that really rung true to me. And so it was really only, you know, about 2/3 of the way through our visits that the idea of doing a book even occurred to me. It was only because he told me one time, kind of out of the blue, I'd asked him, what do you fear the most with your disease? That was the question that really led to Tuesdays with Morrie, because I thought he was going to say, well, I fear the way I'm going to die, or I fear that I'm going to, you know, choke to death, or I'm going to scare people with the way I die, something like that. And he said, I fear the debt that I'm going to leave my family, because I wasn't aware until then that he had racked up all these debts, because dying at home in America, you know, insurance won't cover all those things, and he didn't have a very good arrangement with the university, and he had used up all his money, and then he was in debt. So he said, I'm going to die. That's going to be terrible to my family, and then they're going to have to sell their house and pay my bills, and that's going to be a second debt. Wow. So it was only then that I got the idea to do the book. But by that point, we had already been sort of visiting and doing one subject at a time, you know, with sort of a lesson about it that you can learn. So I really can't tell you any one single thing. But I will say, to sum it all up in a long answer and try to give you an answer to your question, Morrie used to quote a line that he really loved that read, death ends a life, but not a relationship. And, you know, I've never forgotten that, because really, if there was one sentence that sort of summed up everything, it was kind of in that, because you can have a relationship with someone after they're gone, but only if they had an influence on you while they were here. You know, you don't have a relationship with Elvis Presley once he died. You can listen to his music. You don't have a relationship. You don't have a relationship with, you know, John F. Kennedy after he died, unless you were his family. You know, you can do famous, amazing things, but that's not a relationship. The relationship is every little moment that somebody gave you of their life and shared with you and you know, gave you something to remember them by. And so you have to have that relationship while you're here in order to have it go on. And that really permeates everything in life, with your children, with your wife, with your friends, with your family. You have to invest in those relationships if you hope that when you're gone, people will continue those relationships in their heart in any way.
It's a great answer, and I think, and we talk about this a lot on 100 Not Out, is that you can't biohack your way to a great relationship. The only real panacea for a great relationship is time and spending quality time. Mitch, one of the things that you spoke about in your answer, and one thing which I would love to talk to you about, is about culture. And just a quote from Tuesdays with Morrie. Again, we're all about the magic strings of Frankie Presto, which is the new book. But Damien and I, both being fresh, I reread Tuesdays with Morrie. My mum gave me Tuesdays with Morrie, Mitch, when I think I was in my mid-20s, and I think, you know, the younger you read it, it's almost like the more profound the experience, because you can see how you are going to change the direction of your life over the next 6, 7 or 8 decades. So I'm always so grateful to my mum for sharing it with me. But one of the quotes from the book is, it comes straight from Morrie, which is, the culture we have does not make people, oh, I've just lost my note there. The culture we have does not make people feel good about themselves. And in Australia, I mean, we've had Aboriginals here for tens of thousands of years.
Yeah, 30,000 years.
30,000 years. But really, Australia, since it's been settled, so to speak, is less than 230 years old. And so Damien and I often talk about, we recently ran a trip to Ikaria, a Greek island known for its longevity, but you feel how rich the culture is, and then you feel how rich their self-esteem is because of that culture. We look at our culture and go, gosh, Australia's still developing a culture. You know, it's still kind of growing. And then we look at, say, lowered resilience in people or the lowered self-esteem. And I read that quote and I say, what do you say to people that don't feel good about themselves and feel like they live in a culture which doesn't support them as much? Because I think it's quite a confronting thing to come across. What do you say to that?
Well, I would say to them what Morrie said to me, that the part that came after the paragraph that you read, which was, if you don't like the culture, don't buy it. Yeah. There is no order that comes down from on high that says that, you know, you have to eat at McDonald's. There's no order that comes down on high that says you have to have a Twitter account or that says that you need to post on Facebook. These are choices that you make. And I think today, 20 years after Morrie, he would have said, if we were doing that book over again, he would have said, let's put that chapter at the very beginning, because it's harder than ever to divorce yourself from the culture, because the culture is not just Australia anymore. It's global. You know, you used to be able to hide from certain cultures just by getting on a plane and going to a different country. Now, as long as there's a computer, as long as there's Facebook, as long as there's Twitter, as long as there's cameras, you know, and people with camera phones, you can't go anywhere. I mean, literally, the culture is around you all the time. And I happen to think it's a very dangerous one, the self-absorption of talking about yourself and celebrating yourself and posting things about yourself and telling the world, you know, I'm this and I'm that, read my post and read my name, and, you know, nobody else is important, only me. These are very, very difficult things to avoid. There's almost no place. You can go in the middle of the desert and you can still get an internet signal, and you can still see people, you know, doing like this, you know. So you have to make a very conscious choice to say, okay, I'm just not going to do that. And I don't care if people say you're weird or why, you know, how could you not be on Facebook? I hear people say, how could you not? Well, because you choose not to, and you have to choose your own value system. And that really means today, you know, shutting things off, turning them out, keeping your kids away from them, you know, going and experiencing things instead of trying to do them virtually, you know, going and breathing in real air instead of getting a screensaver of a picture of a mountain and saying, oh, you know, every day I wake up, I look at a mountain. No, you look at a picture of a mountain. It's not a mountain. You know, I think it's really hard, but I mean, you have to follow that advice that Morrie said. It's just choose to disengage and understand that there's no penalty for disengaging. It's your life and you can shape it the way you want.
I love that. Mitch, you had an amazing connection with Morrie from the first class. And you talk about, in the book, you talk about when you met him, you thought that maybe you were going to try and skip class. You ended up being trapped in his class and you had to stay in there. By the end of your course, you ended up giving him a briefcase, which was a very moving gesture. And that was like the cement of your relationship. And then obviously there was time there where you kind of disappeared and disengaged. And then when you came back into Morrie's life, it was like best friends had been reunited. That's the way in which the book reads and the way in which the story is told. And then at the end of his life, he talks about the communities that he has. He has 2 communities. He builds a small community around him that love him and he loves them. And then there's another community around him that's kind of just there. And that's kind of, I know I'm paraphrasing, but you were included in that community that loves him and that he loved. And the profound thing about that was that you spent a number of years together, you know, some 20 years earlier. And then later on in his life, you spent 16 weeks together. But your connection was unbelievable. Like, it was unbelievable. And it was is it palpable? That'll be the right word, isn't it? Like you could really touch it and feel that relationship. And I was at times moved to tears just in the way in which you describe things, and the way in which you read the book to me in my, on the Audible audio book. And what I found most profound was that you were able to develop that relationship, but that Morrie was able to identify who really mattered. And I think that that's what we see in the people that we interview that are aging well, is that they surround themselves with communities that they love and that love them. Now, you wanted to not end up like your uncle, and that was a really important part. Have you found that you've probably been more conscious of surrounding yourself with people that you love more than people that just are there? Are you doing things differently there now?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't say that every one of Morrie's lessons has taken on me the way I wish, as the author of the book, they had. I'd love to be a shining example of every single thing that Morrie said or did. But as I always say to people, sometimes they come up to me and say, "Morrie, can I ask you a question?" I say, wait, I wasn't Morrie. I was someone, remember? I was the kid who didn't get it, and in many ways, still I fight against that. But I can say that one of the things that I think I would get an A in is exactly that. I move in a world where there are many, many opportunities to go to parties and networking and hanging out, and there's a lot of name dropping. I know a lot of people who would qualify as famous, and I've made movies and I'm on television, and it would be very easy to just sort of flip from one of those to the other. And I can tell you that I am terribly known as the absentee member of all those things. I would much rather just be at home with my wife and my family than do anything. And I have probably cost myself some connections and some opportunities, and this film or that book or that thing, by not going to all those things. But my wife and I joke around as we get older. There's an expression we say, we're too old to be breaking in new people. And I don't mean it to be negative. I sort of mean it to say the old friends and the people who I know care for me and I care for the right reasons. They're in my life for a reason. They're time tested and true. And you only have so much time in your life, and to constantly be looking for the next exciting person to hang around with and the next person who can help you, and that is a very unsatisfying thing at the end of the day. My happiest moments are when we have our family, our nieces, our nephews, or kids in our lives, all sprawled out over the house, sleeping on the floor, sleeping on the couches. They all fell asleep, and I walk through the house and I see, there's that one, and there's my wife, there's my sister, there's my brother, there's my nieces and nephews, there's whoever it might be, and everybody's under one roof and we're all together. There's nothing, there's no connection, there's no movie, there's no book party, there's no anything that comes close to that for me. And I always hear Morrie, in my head saying, what you just said, surround yourself with the people who really love you and who are going to be part of that death end of life, but not a relationship circle when you're gone. Not people who say, "Oh yeah, he was the life of the party when he was here," or who's going to get his show after he's dead, or I wonder what the book publisher's going to do now that he's not here to publish his book. I don't want those to be the comments that are made upon my disappearance. I would like people that I love to say, "Remember the time that we did this, and remember the time that he said that," and that's how I know I led a good life. So I have no problem shutting out the people that, not being mean, but just saying, okay, I'm going home now, and that's where I'm going to be.
One final question from me, Mitch, and this is about the people that you have let into your life. Tell us, is the Rock Bottom Remainders still going? Because this band of people includes Stephen King, Ridley Pearce and Dave Barry. So there are some famous people which you do choose to spend some regular time with, and the Rock Bottom Remainders seem to have done an incredible job raising a lot of money for some wonderful causes and the rest. When you're not spending time with family, you have a love of music. I must be honest, I haven't heard the Rock Bottom Remainders perform, but I want to come to a concert when Damo and I are in the States. Are you still going? Will we get the opportunity to see you live in action? And what can we expect from the Rock Bottom Remainders?
First of all, you're you're blessed to have never heard us. You would not be making those comments if you had. But Rock Bottom Remainders, for those who don't know what you're talking about, is a band that formed, gosh, probably about 24 years ago. And Stephen King, Amy Tan, Dave Barry, Ridley Pierce, and myself. A lot of people have been in it over the years. James McBride, who wrote Color of Water, Frankie Port, Angela's Ashes, Barbara Kingsolver, Carl Hyacin. A lot of people have flitted in and out, but the ones I said at the beginning are kind of the mainstays. I was a musician, and Dave Barry was a musician a little bit. There are a couple people that know what they're doing. But for the most part, as Dave Barry says, we play music about as well as Metallica writes novels. And, it's mostly just old rock and roll, and we do it all for fun. Nobody makes a dime, and we raise money for literacy. And we have played all over the States and a couple places around the world. We were over in England and Ireland a couple times. And I'm sure if somebody down in Australia wanted us to come down, we'd put it together, but nobody has asked. And rightly so, if you ever heard us. But it's a lot of fun, and I don't do that because of the people in it are famous. I do it because music is my first love. I finally got around to writing it in that book, The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto. It's the first time I've ever written about music, but it's always been my passion. And, I'll play in any band anytime if I can make the time for it. And it just so happens that those guys love music as well, even though they all love to write, and we've become quite friendly over the years. And I can tell you that, for all the time that we spend together in rehearsals and playing, around the country, whatever, nobody ever talks about writing. It's amazing, it's like a refuge from that. Everybody just talks about what chord did we get wrong, but nobody really talks about writing. So it's not a networking, it's not a connection thing. It's not an opportunity thing. It's just friendship. And some of those people have become really good friends of mine.
Oh, Mitch, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, to interview anyone that does what they love and loves what they do.
Absolutely.
And does it with such passion, and you've been so generous with your time and sharing so many wonderful stories. Folks, for more on Mitch and for the Magic Strings of Frankie Presto, go to mitchalbom.com. Check out all 7 books. I am busting now, Mitch, having spoken with you this morning. I want to read For One More Day, Have a Little Faith, The Timekeeper, The First Phone Call from Heaven, The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto. I'm just about to finish Tuesdays with Morrie for the second time. Again, on behalf of Damien and myself and the other 35 million people that have read your books in 45 languages in 49 countries and watched your movies and listened to your music as well, thank you so much for joining us and for what you do for humanity. And as we like to say to every single one of our guests, may the rest of your life, Mitch, continue to be the best of your life.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun talking to you guys. Hello to everybody down there in Australia.
Damien, thanks again for your wisdom on 100 and Out. Folks, go to thewellnesscouch.com to see all 22 podcasts on The Wellness Couch. Go to iTunes to give this podcast a 5-star rating. Push us up the rankings globally. And until next time, continue to make the rest of your life the best of your life.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.